Close-Up is brought to you by the Kia Sorento R, redefining the power of Kia.
Yes, good evening. They're called the invisible children. The kids often ignored or overlooked because mum or dad is in prison. Statistics tell us that children of criminals are highly likely to end up in jail as well. And right now, here's a number. There are 8,000 inmates locked up in our prisons. But the news isn't all bad for these stigmatised kids. With an eye to the future, Prison Fellowship has begun a program designed to break the criminal cycle. Jahan Casanada visited the holiday camp with the difference.
I've heard them referred to as the invisible children. I think society doesn't necessarily see them. And even though they haven't done the crime, often they're judged. If we really look at them, then it's like, help, I might have to get involved. And that can be scary.
We can't show you their faces, you wouldn't recognise their names, but some of their parents have made headlines. These are the kids of current prisoners.
They've lost a parent, but so many other kids have lost a parent, whether it's through divorce or death, and so it's kind of like, oh yeah, same old, same old.
But here's a sobering statistic. A child who has a parent in prison is 6 times more likely to end up in prison themselves.
There is that high chance that they will offend and just create that whole cycle over and over again.
Prison Fellowship wants to break that cycle.
Never mind, I'll find someone like you.
This is a holiday camp for prisoners' kids, one of the first in the country. For some kids, it's a welcome break from day-to-day life.
We have sort of mean people at our school, like that make fun of people.
So do people make fun of you?
Yeah.
And what do they say to you?
I say mean stuff about my dad.
For some children, they're not told what has happened and they just kind of pick up little bits and there's a whole secrecy around it.
Do you know how long he's been there for?
Quite a long time.
And do you get to see him at all?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Is it tough not being able to see your dad very often?
Yeah. No, sometimes he's out, like in the open, but sometimes he's behind glass. Like.
And what's it like seeing Dad behind glass?
It's not that funny because sometimes he's like naughty.
Principal Youth Court Judge Andrew Beecroft has long warned that many young crims have followed in one of their parents' footsteps.
The children, the young men we see in youth court have had short, sharp shocks all their lives. Dad's long gone, Dad's in prison.
Look at Rorangi Marino, the 16-year-old who raped and attacked a 5-year-old girl in a Turangi campground. It was a case that shocked New Zealand, but Marino came from a dysfunctional family. Both his parents were involved in gangs and his dad was in prison. With one parent in prison, many children see changes in their home life.
Some are blended families because once one parent's gone to prison, the remaining one meets someone new. And others it can be single parent with however many children they had. But added on to that, there's often a shame factor.
Brent knows what that's like.
I haven't got many pieces left.
When he was growing up, his dad was in prison.
I felt as though it was my fault. It was always my fault. We weren't a family and everyone else had these families and I felt different than everyone else.
Now Brent's a volunteer for Pillars, a charity that supports prisoners' kids. Brent mentors a 12-year-old boy.
He's a good kid, there's no doubt he's bright and he loves his sport and he loves his rugby. If we don't look after these kids and put them on the straight and narrow and give them some sort of guidance, they're the ones that the mainstream New Zealand are going to be paying for to be in prison.
And at around 90 grand a year per prisoner, it's a big cost.
I think it's a wake-up call.
I wish nothing but the best.
Pip says what the kids need most is positive role models, the support of other families in their community, and the freedom to not be judged.
Think about how do we see these kids, because if we want to see crime reduced countrywide, we've got to be that fence at the top of the cliff.
So, a good idea, but will it actually work? Now, Mike Templeton's a former inmate whose son is now doing time, and he's with us. Nice to see you.
Good to Mike.
You've turned yourself around, though, haven't you?
I have indeed.
So if you've turned yourself around, why can't everyone turn themselves around?
Well, it's a complex question, isn't it? I think it comes from a lot of areas. It's how you're nurtured in those earlier years, I think. For me, I grew up quite well with good parents, good nurturing, so when I actually come unstuck, which is perhaps around about the 12, 13-year-old mark, I was able to sort of come back to something that was given to me at an early age. A lot of people don't have that opportunity.
If you don't start with it, you're never going to be able to get it back.
Exactly.
So what happened with your son? How did that unfold, though?
Well, that's a big story. I was an absentee father. So probably when Dylan's maybe 3, 4 years old, I was absent from his life in a continuous periods. Dylan would come to see me in prison, of course, and I think something happens when you see your father in prison, and it's not a hospitable place. As much as we try to make prisons hospitable and warm and in some way inviting, they really aren't the home. And so there's something happens, I think, to children that age, and they can't make meaning or sense of why this stuff's happening. And I think sometimes we develop an anti-authoritarian stance towards things. Why is Dad not here? Why is this institution...
You become anti-society, anti-establishment, and the rest, as they say, is history. So how do you get around that, though? I mean, how do you deal with the stigma? If your dad's in prison, you're going to get a hard time at school. That's just how life works. How do you, I don't know, arm kids with something that they can deal with that?
I think one of the problems is people believe sometimes they're alone in their problems. Now, I think camps like this, what we're talking about, is it brings people together to realise that there's problems, societal problems that we can share together. And so a sense of being together with people, I think, is important. I think also the institution of the camp in itself, people can actually see, children can see that there's a safe platform to discuss these things. To start asking questions, why is this, why is that?
Why doesn't, see, I like to be eternally optimistic, why doesn't the opposite happen? Why don't I look at Dad in prison and I go, there is no way in the world I'm ending up like him, and I go off and do something positive with my life? Why doesn't that work more often?
Well, I think it comes back to what I originally said, that when you see Dad in prison, perhaps especially when you're younger, you can't make sense of why Dad is in prison, or you can see that Dad's no longer in the home. And so Dad is somehow being taken away and put into this place. Why? And kids can't understand that.
Is there a difference, though, between, for example, a father who makes an horrific mistake, a one-off mistake, and suddenly your world's turned upside down and Dad's off in prison for a period of time, but he comes out and he's still a good person fundamentally despite his mistake, versus the child who grows up in a home where Dad's in and out, if he's around at all?
Of course there is. I mean, a one-off absence from a father is seen by a child as a one-off absence. So it's, you know, sustainability. If Dad's never around, then it goes in deeper, doesn't it, for a child?
Do you make progress? Do you see progress? All of these interviews and discussions we have about problems in society and prisons and recidivism and all of that, so do you actually see that you're making a difference?
Yes, you do. People make a difference. Sometimes, you know, you can't cure all these problems, but you make the difference with the 1 or 2 people, and not just 1 or 2 people, who actually come in contact with you.
Nature versus nurture, do you think? Is
Definitely.
it nature? You can't fix nature, or is it nurture and you can?
No, you can't actually fix nature. Nurture, I think, people are born with a propensity to either do right or to do wrong. We're born as people who try to make sense of things. So I think how we nurture people and how we allow them to make sense of different things then inclines them towards the good things in life.
Well, keep up the good work. I appreciate your time this Friday night very much. Mike Templeton.